fueling on the bike is so dependent on the person, their training program, their goals, their appetite. So there's always a depends, and every client and every athlete is going to be slightly different. These are sort of guidelines of the general consensus, but I'm always digging a little bit further to see what else is going on in the day, what they do for work, and what we're chasing, how much performance we're chasing from that session as well, and then what follow-up session we need to target. But this is more of a general guide.
Should I fuel for a 1 hour zone 2 ride?
General answer for that for me would be no. If
Okay.
it's a 60-minute zone 2 ride, probably not necessary, so long as the meal following that is going to provide you with enough balance of your proteins, carbs, fats and fiber to balance out appetite. But generally a zone 2 ride, 60 minutes, isn't going to increase appetite too much and doesn't require fuel for that sort of a ride.
Okay, is there a benefit of not eating during that ride as well, or it's just more so personal preference?
Personal preference. It's pretty rare for someone to have a really large appetite after a 60-minute zone 2 session. If you were the person that stimulates your appetite a lot, then the benefit to having something to eat before or during it is it will level that appetite post, so you're less likely to eat a huge meal sort of either immediately post or later in the day.
Okay. There's a bit of a theory behind becoming better fat adapted by not eating. Is there any truth behind that?
Definitely.
Okay.
And again, depending on how long that session is, if you're going in fasted, so we're talking morning session, I'm going to be using fat as fuel as opposed to carbohydrates as fuel. Depending on how much you've eaten the day before as well.
Okay.
So yes, you can sort of train low is the term, and become more fat adapted. If it was 60 minutes, I don't see that being an issue at all on performance.
Okay. What about a 2 hour, I'm now outdoors, I'm doing 2 hours at zone 2. Would you recommend eating?
This is one that depends purely on the client's goals. If they were looking at weight loss, I would suggest that it depends on their riding history and how fit they were. If they're a fit athlete, and a well-trained athlete we would call that, zone 2 for 2 hours, I'd probably suggest that they either go for 0 fuel for that one or a very small amount. So it might be sort of 30 grams in total either before, or they might have 30 grams throughout the ride or per hour. Again, dependent on how sort of well-trained that athlete was.
Yep, 30 grams of carbs.
Carbohydrates, sorry. Yep. If they were quite a new athlete and they were sort of new to cycling, I would give them some form of fuel either before or during, probably not both.
Okay.
But either fuel a little bit before and then fuel a little bit during a zone 2 ride. And that's purely because it's going to require more energy from them. Even at zone 2, it's still going to require more energy for a newer athlete who's not used to training for 2 hours. So for training for 2 hours, even at that zone 2 low intensity, it's still going to require a fair bit more energy for them than someone who's more elite.
Okay.
So they're more likely to be hungrier later in the day. The recovery is going to be compromised if they don't fuel for a zone 2 2-hour session.
Okay. Last one on zone 2, well trained, 3 hours plus.
Definitely.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
And what you should be aiming for, like 50 grams of carbs per hour?
Yeah, I usually kind of cap that around 60 an hour.
Okay.
So anywhere from 30 to 60 an hour for a well-trained athlete, zone 2, 3 hours plus. Again, it's not because they're going to feel they need it. They could probably quite easily get through 3 hour plus sort of zone 2 ride without the need for fueling. It's more so to set them up for better recovery and for the following session, and also to control their appetite throughout the day. So it's not so much looking at that 3 hours worth of training that we're targeting, it's kind of everything after that we're looking at sort of supporting.
Okay, let's move on to sweet spot. And we'll sort of merge tempo into this as well, and sub-threshold, which is pretty much sweet spot anyway. I'm doing a sweet spot session, interval sweet spot session on the trainer for an hour. Should I eat or drink or consume carbohydrate?
Depending on the following session and what you've had the day before, what you've had the day after. As a general rule, sweet spot tempo, 60 minutes. Well-trained athlete, no.
Okay.
Again, if they had a really hard session either later that day, even if it was a strength session in the gym, I would say yes, to set them up for better performance later in the day. However, 60 minutes, no. Again, new athlete, new to cycling, yes, definitely.
Okay. What about we extend that out by half an hour, 90 minutes, sweet spot interval session?
Definitely.
Okay. Yep. And what should we be aiming for in terms of carbohydrate? Because I know for optimal performance for a well-trained athlete, it's kind of like 90 plus. So is that for like proper high intensity VO2 max anaerobic, or should we actually be doing that at a sweet spot level as well?
Look, I usually take the approach that I would be hitting their high targets only on those really high intensity VO2 max kind of sessions. For anything that's sort of sweet spot, I would find that sort of happy medium. So probably around the 60 to 75 grams worth of carbohydrates per hour for a well-trained athlete.
Okay, cool. And then, of course, if we're going 2 hours plus, it's going to be definitely fueling.
Yep.
For people that sort of struggle for, if they're getting on the trainer for a sweet spot session during the week for 90 minutes and they're struggling to eat carbs before, some people struggle with eating before they get on the bike. I've had that question a bit. What would you recommend that they do?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different strategies you can approach there. Either, we work through that gut training and we start with something really easy like a liquid or, dried fruit or something that's really easy to get down. And then work way into sort of more solid food. The other option is we just go straight into sort of your sports drinks or gels, from the moment you get on the bike. So that, they're on the bike within the first 5 to 10 minutes we start fueling. So we're not waiting for the first 60 minutes to go past. We're kind of fueling from 0 minutes onwards because we do want that energy readily available so that we're not taking on fuel as we feel we need it. We're kind of taking on it before we get to that spot, because I'm a firm believer by the time you feel you need fuel, it's too late and you're chasing your tail, and we're already compromising performance and likely compromising your recovery from that session as well.
Okay. Is there any benefit then, just to drill into that one a little bit further, to eating versus having like a sports drink with 90 grams of carbs, which you can get these days? Because obviously a sports drink with 90 grams of carbs is so much easier. You can just get straight into it. Whereas eating before, you almost need to prepare the meal and wait a little bit. So is there any pros and cons there?
Pros and cons to both. Pros of a sports drink is very readily available, easy to digest. We're also going to target hydration. We're likely going to be able to get some electrolytes in there as well, total fluid consumption, and it's quickly absorbed as well. So it's ready into the muscles, ready to go. Whereas when you're eating food, the benefit to that is we're getting other nutrients as well. So you could, have a bowl of rolled oats, for example. We might have a banana. There's going to be some other vitamins and minerals coming from that. And a lot of people are starting to opt for that option because they're looking at more of sort of an overall health. In saying that, sports drink, used correctly for performance is not an unhealthy option.
Yes.
So there's, people need to understand that there's a difference between fueling for health and then fueling for your performance on the bike. The downside to eating before training is, just making sure that it's sitting well in your gut. There's a little bit of extra time to digestion, so you might need to eat that 30 minutes prior. That might be another 30 minutes that you're not able to sleep for. So we've got to take these things into consideration as well.